The rain battered against the windshield of my old sedan, a rhythmic drumming that usually calmed me but tonight only amplified the chaotic thumping of my heart. I sat parked across the street from the sprawling estate in Kingswood, the wipers slicing back and forth, offering brief glimpses of the warm, golden glow spilling from the windows of the house. It was a mansion, really. A testament to old money and new ambition, with its manicured hedges that defied the wild Pacific Northwest weather and the stone columns that stood like sentries guarding a life I was not part of. On the passenger seat lay a heavy, cream-colored envelope. I reached out and touched the textured paper, tracing the calligraphy of my daughter's name, Isabella. Inside was a check that represented the liquidation of my retirement account, the last of the life insurance money from my late husband, the final dregs of a life spent giving, saving, and sacrificing. It was her 35th birthday, 35 years since I had held a screaming, red-faced infant in a cramped hospital room and promised her the universe. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My gray hair was pulled back in a neat, sensible bun. My coat was wool, well-maintained but clearly at least a decade old. I looked like what I was. Elena Vance, a retired librarian who clipped coupons and kept the thermostat at 65 degrees to save on heating. I did not look like the mother of the woman who lived in that fortress across the street. Taking a deep breath that rattled in my chest, I grabbed the envelope and stepped out into the deluge. The cold water instantly soaked through my shoes, biting at my ankles. I walked up the long, winding driveway, passing cars that cost more than my house, sleek German engineering, Italian sports cars, towering luxury SUVs. They were parked haphazardly, an arrogant display of wealth. When I reached the massive oak front doors, I hesitated. I could hear the hum of conversation inside, the clinking of crystal, a jazz piano melody floating in the air. I rang the bell. The moments that followed stretched into eternity. Then, the heavy door cracked open. It was Isabella. She was breathtaking. She wore a silk gown the color of emeralds that clung to her slender frame, her hair cascading in perfect, glossy waves. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. But the moment her eyes met mine, the radiant hostess vanished. Her face contorted into a mask of sheer panic and undisguised annoyance. "Mom? What are you doing here?" It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. It was a hiss meant to be contained within the crack of the door. "I came to give you your gift, Bella. Happy birthday." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. I held out the envelope, the rain dripping from my sleeve onto the pristine porch tiles. Isabella didn't take it. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. I could see the foyer behind her, a chandelier the size of a small car, marble floors, people holding flutes of champagne. "You can't be here, Mom. Julian's family is here. The investors are here. Victoria is holding court in the living room. I just wanted to see you. Just for a moment." "No, not now. You don't understand. It's a cultivated guest list." She stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind her, cutting off the warmth and the music. We were alone in the cold, damp air. She snatched the envelope from my hand, not with gratitude, but with the urgency of someone disposing of incriminating evidence. "I can't have you inside looking like this." She gestured vaguely at my coat, my wet shoes, my entire existence. "Victoria is already on edge. Please, Mom. Just go. We'll do lunch next month. Or something." Next month. It had been 6 months since I last saw her. "Isabella, I drove an hour. And you should have called. Look, thank you for the card. Really. But you have to leave. Now. Before anyone sees you." She placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a caress. It was a shove, gentle, physically, but spiritually violent. She was pushing me toward the stairs, pushing me out of her life. "Go, Mom, please." The door opened again behind her. A tall, imperious woman with silver hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection stepped out. It was Victoria Sterling, her mother-in-law. She held a glass of wine and looked at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered onto the property. "Is everything all right, Isabella? Who is this?" Isabella froze. Her spine stiffened. She didn't look at me. She looked at Victoria, her eyes pleading for approval. "It's nobody, Victoria. Just a delivery." They had the wrong address. I was just sending them away. A delivery. Nobody. The words didn't just hurt. They eviscerated me. They cut through the layers of maternal love, through the memories of bedtime stories and scraped knees, through the years of double shifts and skipped meals. Victoria raised an eyebrow, her gaze sweeping over me with disdain. Well, hurry up, darling. The senator is asking for you. I'll be right there, Isabella chirped, her voice pitching up into that fake, socialite lilt I had grown to hate. Victoria turned and went back inside. Isabella looked at me one last time. Her eyes were hard. Go. She turned, slipped back into the warmth, and closed the door. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in the hollow chamber of my chest. I stood there for a long time. The rain mixed with the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Inside, laughter erupted, a roar of collective joy that I was excluded from. I was the mother who had birthed her, raised her, loved her when she was nothing but potential and need. And now, I was nobody. Just a delivery. I walked back to my car like a ghost. I sat in the driver's seat, shivering, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked at those hands. They were wrinkled, spotted with age. These hands had scrubbed floors. These hands had shelved thousands of books. These hands had signed the checks for her tuition, her braces, her first car, her wedding dress. I couldn't breathe. The rejection wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I stared at the house, at the shadows moving behind the silk curtains. I imagined them in there. Julian, handsome and vacuous, Victoria, the puppet master, and Isabella, performing the role of the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, built on a foundation of lies and my silent erasure. Something snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a quiet, internal shift. A gear that had been stuck for decades finally turning. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the cold leather, and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I dialed a number I had saved 2 weeks ago, but never had the courage to call. It rang twice. Thorne Investigations. The voice was gravelly, professional, devoid of judgment. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, steady, cold, detached. This is Elena Vance. Mrs. Vance. I didn't expect to hear from you until Monday. Change of plans, I said, staring at the golden light of the mansion. Execute it. Everything we discussed, send it all, now. There was a pause on the other end. A heavy pause. You understand what this means, Mrs. Vance? Once I release the packet, once I send the notifications, you can't unring that bell. This is the nuclear option. I looked at the closed door of the house. I thought about the check in the envelope Isabella was probably clutching against her chest, unopened, unappreciated. I know, I whispered. Do it. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. Then, I waited. I didn't have to wait long to understand why I sat in that car, watching the destruction of my daughter's life with a cold sense of justice. You have to understand who we were before the money, before the Sterlings. I was widowed when Isabella was 7. My husband, Frank, was a good man, a high school history teacher who loved baseball and bad puns. He died of a sudden aneurysm on a Tuesday afternoon. Just like that, our world collapsed. We had no savings to speak of, just a small life insurance policy and a house with a mortgage we could barely afford. I didn't date. I didn't remarry. I didn't take vacations. I worked. I worked at the library during the day and transcribed medical records at night. I made sure Isabella never felt the pinch of poverty, even if I felt it every time I skipped dinner so she could have a new dress for the school dance. She was brilliant, sharp, ambitious, beautiful. She wanted to be a doctor, then a lawyer, then a CEO. I fueled those dreams. I told her she was destined for greatness. I didn't want her to have my life, a life of small rooms and careful budgeting. When she got into a prestigious private university, I cried with joy. I refinanced the house to pay the tuition. I drove a car that was falling apart so she could have a meal plan. But somewhere in those 4 years, she changed. She met Julian Sterling in her junior year. The Sterlings were essentially royalty in our state. Real estate, tech investments, politics. Julian was charming, in a vague, soft way, but he came with expectations. And he came with Victoria. The first time I met Victoria Sterling was at a brunch before the wedding. She looked at my off-the-rack suit and offered me a pitying smile that felt like a slap. She asked me about my husband's investment portfolio. When I told her he had been a teacher, she said, "How quaint," as if he were a fictional character. Isabella saw this, but instead of defending me, she shrank. She started correcting my grammar. She asked me not to mention the library. She started buying me clothes, telling me, "Mom, just wear this, it's more appropriate." I went along with it. I thought I was helping her fit in. I thought this was just the price of her happiness. The wedding was a spectacle. I was seated at table 19, near the kitchen doors, with a distant cousin of the groom and 2 staff members. During the toasts, Isabella thanked Julian's parents for their generosity, their guidance, their love. She didn't mention me, not once. After the wedding, the drift became a chasm. Calls went unanswered. Visits were rescheduled. When I did see her, she was always anxious, checking her phone, talking about galas and board meetings and the pressure Victoria was putting on her to run the foundation. Then came the requests for money. It started small. "Mom, I'm in a bind with a credit card Julian doesn't know about. Can you lend me $500?" I gave it to her. Then it was, "Mom, I need to make an investment to prove to Victoria I'm savvy. Can you sign a loan as a guarantor?" I did it. I always did it. But 6 months ago, I went to buy groceries. My card was declined. I went to the bank, confused. The teller, a kind woman I had known for years, looked at me with pity. "Mrs. Vance, your accounts are overdrawn, and the payment on the second mortgage is overdue." Second mortgage? I hadn't taken out a second mortgage. I sat in the bank manager's office as the world spun. Isabella. She had forged my signature. She had used my personal information I trusted her with, to open credit cards, to refinance my home, to drain my retirement. I called her, screaming, crying. She broke down. She told me she was drowning. That keeping up with the Sterlings cost more than Julian gave her. That Victoria watched every penny of the family trust, and Isabella needed her own money to maintain the facade, the clothes, the gifts, the donations to charity, to look the part. "Mom, I'll pay it back," she sobbed. "I promise. Just don't tell Julian. If he knows, he'll leave me. Victoria will destroy me. Please, Mom. You've always saved me. Save me one more time." And I did. Like a fool, I did. I didn't press charges. I scrambled. I sold my jewelry. I took extra shifts consulting. I lived on ramen noodles. I saved her secret. But tonight was the end. Because tonight I realized that she didn't steal from me because she was desperate. She stole from me because she didn't respect me. She stole from me because to her, I was a resource to be mined, not a person to be loved. And standing on that porch, being called a delivery person, being erased so she could shine, that was the final straw. I looked at the house again. The lights were still bright, but the atmosphere was about to change. Marcus Thorne was expensive, but he was thorough. I had hired him to track where the money went. I wanted to know if she was truly paying off debts or if she was funding a lifestyle. The dossier Marcus had compiled was sickening. My retirement fund hadn't gone to pay off a secret debt. It had gone to a boutique in Paris, a spa in Switzerland, and a loan to a friend that was actually a cover for a gambling debt. She wasn't just struggling. She was reckless, and she was cruel. Marcus had found texts between Isabella and her friends. Having lunch with my mother is so draining. She smells like old books in desperation. I just need her to sign one more thing, and then I can get that bracelet. Don't worry, she won't say anything. She's obsessed with me. It's pathetic. Pathetic. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. Packet delivered. Emails sent to Julian Sterling, Victoria Sterling, and the entire board of directors of the Sterling Foundation. All guests' phones should be receiving the airdrop link now via the local proximity server we set up in the van down the street. I watched the house. For a minute, nothing happened. The music continued. The shadows danced. Then I saw it. The movement in the living room stopped. It was as if a conductor had suddenly cut the orchestra. The shadows froze. I imagined the scene. The pinging of phones, the confusion, the curiosity. The email Marcus sent was simple. The subject line, "The fraudulent activities of Isabella Vance Sterling." Attached were the bank statements showing the forgery, the credit card bills in my name, the text messages where she mocked the Sterling family, calling Victoria a control freak witch and Julian a spineless trust fund baby, and, most damning of all, the proof that she had been embezzling small amounts from the Sterling Foundation charity accounts to pay the interest on the loans she took out in my name. Inside the house, the silence must have been deafening. I saw the front door fly open. Isabella burst out. She wasn't holding the envelope anymore. She was clutching her phone, her face pale, her eyes wild. She looked around frantically, scanning the darkness. She saw my car. She ran down the steps, stumbling in her high heels, ignoring the rain that was now ruining her silk dress. She sprinted down the driveway toward me. "Mom! Mom!" I watched her come. I didn't unlock the doors. I rolled down the window just an inch. She reached the car, breathless, mascara running down her cheeks. She grabbed the door handle and pulled, but it was locked. She pounded on the glass. "Mom, what did you do? My phone is blowing up." "Julian, Victoria. Everyone got an email. They know everything." I looked at her calmly. Her hair was plastered to her skull. She looked small. "I know, Isabella." "Why?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this? You promised. You said you'd save me." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear, yes, but I also saw the narcissism. Even now, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking why I had stopped being her doormat. "I did save you, Bella," I said softly. "What? You destroyed me." "No," I said. "I saved myself." Behind her, I saw Julian come out of the house. He looked shell-shocked. He was holding his phone, staring at it, then at Isabella. Victoria was behind him, and even from this distance, I could see the cold fury radiating from her. She pointed a finger at Isabella, shouting something I couldn't hear. But the gesture was clear. "Get out." Isabella turned and saw them. She looked back at me, terror in her eyes. "Mom, please, let me in. Let me in the car. We have to go. Take me home." I looked at the daughter I had raised. I remembered the little girl who used to bring me dandelions. I mourned her, but the woman standing in the rain was a stranger who had cannibalized my life to feed her ego. "No," I said. "What? Mom, you can't leave me here. They're going to kill me. Julian is going to divorce me. I have nowhere to go." I started the engine. The vibration of the car felt like a heartbeat, strong, steady. "You're smart, Isabella. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. But you won't do it on my dime anymore. And you won't do it while standing on my back." I put the car in gear. "Mom! No! Mom!" I began to back up. She ran alongside the car for a few steps, banging on the window, screaming, begging. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love you." I stopped the car for a brief second. I looked her in the eye. "No, Bella. You don't love me. You love what I do for you. There's a difference." I accelerated. I watched in the rearview mirror as she stood in the middle of the dark, rainy street. A small, broken figure in a ruined green dress, illuminated by the headlights of her husband's family coming to cast her out. I drove away. I didn't cry. I turned on the radio. A classical station was playing Debussy. It was beautiful. The fallout was spectacular, as expected in a town like Kingswood. My phone rang for days. Isabella called 100 times. Julian called. Even Victoria's lawyers called. I answered none of them. I changed my number. I went to my bank with Arthur Caldwell, a lawyer I had hired with the very last of my savings I had kept hidden in a coffee can, a habit from my grandmother that finally paid off. We met with the fraud department. With the evidence Marcus provided, the process was straightforward. I filed police reports for identity theft. I pressed charges. It was hard. No mother wants to press charges against her child. The detective asked me 3 times if I was sure. I looked at the stack of papers, the loans, the second mortgage, the credit cards. I looked at the photos of my house, the house Frank and I had bought, which was now at risk of foreclosure because of her. "I'm sure," I said. Isabella was arrested 2 weeks later. It was all over the local news. Socialite scammer, they called her. The Sterling family distanced themselves with brutal efficiency. Julian filed for divorce and annulment simultaneously. He claimed he was a victim, and perhaps he was, but he was also a fool who never wondered how his wife afforded her life. I didn't visit her in jail. Months passed. The foreclosure on my house was halted once the fraud was proven. The banks cleared my name, though my credit score would take years to recover. I sold the big house anyway. It had too many ghosts. I moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment near the waterfront. It was cozy. I filled it with books. I bought a comfortable chair. I adopted a cat named Oliver. For the first time in 30 years, my money was my own. My time was my own. One rainy afternoon, about a year after the birthday party, I received a letter. It was forwarded from my old address. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. It was from Isabella. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and opened it. "Mom, I'm writing this from a halfway house in Seattle. I took a plea deal, probation, community service, restitution. The Sterlings took everything. I have nothing. I work at a diner now. I serve coffee to people who look through me like I'm invisible. My feet hurt every day. I count my tips to see if I can afford rent. I hate you for what you did. I want you to know that. You ruined my life. But last week, a customer yelled at me because his eggs were cold. He called me stupid. He humiliated me in front of everyone, and I stood there and took it because I needed the job. And I thought of you. I thought of how Victoria treated you, how I treated you. I thought of you standing on the porch in the rain. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I forgive you yet. But I understand now. I finally understand what it feels like to be the one standing in the rain. I hope you're warm. Bella?" I folded the letter. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness is a tricky thing. People tell you it's for yourself, not the other person. But sometimes, forgiveness is just another way of opening the door to let the wolf back in. I looked out at the rain falling on the harbor. I was warm, I was safe, I was solvent. I thought about the lesson I had been forced to learn so late in life. We are taught that a mother's love must be unconditional, a bottomless well that never runs dry. But that is a lie. Even wells run dry if you take and never give back. Self-respect isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't an act of war, it's an act of survival. I had spent my life making myself small so Isabella could feel big. I had set myself on fire to keep her warm, and she had complained about the smoke. No more. I took a sip of my tea. It was hot, soothing. I picked up a book I had been meaning to read for years. The phone didn't ring. The house was quiet, and in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt since Frank died. I found myself, and she was enough.